afternoon, morning to others, my fellow colleagues and women leaders. This dialogue takes place for us just 4 days to our Mother's Day celebration in South Africa, which is held on the second weekend of every May, and 10th May being the day this year for 2020. And the difficulty that COVID-19 presents to society, we have begun to note that it is likely to be expressed more in the lives of women than in any other. For example, on our economies and effects that will have the household difficulties will be felt more by mothers who carry a responsibility of making sure that they feed their families, and there's always something that is being put on the table for their families before going to bed. So the scramble will be left of the socio-economic opportunities after COVID-19 will only magnify the existence of gender inequalities. This is so because gender roles determine men and women as caregiving duties, mobility, livelihoods, and access to economic opportunities and education. According to the International Labour Organization, women represent less than 40% of total employment, but make up to 57% of those who are working on a part-time basis across the world. The United Nations Population Fund's recent report on protecting sexual and reproductive health and rights and promoting gender equality highlighted the fact that women represent close to 70% of health and social sector workforce globally. So this is the workforce that will be affected in the main by the pandemic. This is the same case as well in South Africa, as the majority of our frontline workers are women. So these include nurses, midwives, home care, and household bearers, community health workers, social workers, cashiers and cleaners, domestic workers, just to mention a few. So it truly does make a case that women will be more exposed to risk of infection than their male counterparts. In the economic front, fewer women than men are participating, unfortunately, in the formal economy of our country, and I think relatively in the world. Lately, more women were beginning to take inroads into small, medium, and macro enterprises, while many remain trapped in the informal sector. In Africa, a picture of women selling with the buckets of tomatoes in their heads, trying to make a living for their families is very familiar. Again, South Africa is no exception to that. And it has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. Women in the first quarter of 2018 were sitting at an unemployment rate of 29.5 in the second quarter as compared to 25.3 against men. So there is a discrepancy or a deficit of around 4% of more women who are unemployed as of 2018. And this was at the same time last year, which means the effect of the COVID-19 will only be felt after the pandemic has passed and more women will be unemployed. Also, this is to demonstrate that women are impacted in France to be more of the, for example, if you look at the gender-based violence, more women will be trapped in their homes with their abusers, increased economic distress, which I've already articulated to, high exposure, which I've already articulated to, and increased vulnerability economically and socially because of COVID-19 and general loss of income. Our government program interventions include, amongst others, supply of personal protective equipment, PPE, provision of water, to eliminate women from going into the river to fetch water and wood, continuous primary health care, provision of shelter for the homeless, and dignity packs for displaced and vulnerable women. Our president have just increased social grants for the period of 6 months, which is mostly benefiting women who are unemployed and who are on pension, and social distress reliefs for many who are part of women. And this distress includes sanitary towels to women. Most importantly, the data now is beginning to be available to show what could be actionable to inform what could we do as government across the world to wrap up and pick up the pieces after the effect of COVID-19. So gender inequalities, we anticipate them to widen after the pandemic, and gains in women's rights and girls, which have been made with regard to accumulation of human capital, economic empowerment, might be reversed, and to a very great extent. So we're more likely to lose jobs as women in the women emancipation and labor market is often in the form of temporary employment. So your tourism sector and your food hospitality sector, they are currently on a standstill, and you find those are the ones which are more acceptable to employment for women, and they are shedding more, and they've already begun in many countries to shed more. So we're likely going to see more women staying in places and being unemployed after the COVID-19. So some of the things which we need to find as a positive side is the flexible working arrangements, which allow women now, in a way, to be able to share responsibilities with men at home, but also creation of family-friendly workplaces, which I think create flexible hours and inclusive patterns of life in society we need to advocate for. So we need to make sure that government support measures to ensure that informal and part-time and seasonal workers are mostly encouraged, but the system allows them to be able to work. Government bailouts may have to be introduced for small, micro, and small businesses where women are mostly entrepreneurs. The gender analysis and data collection so that women needs and realities do not fall off the cracks, but we also continue to highlight the importance of keeping gender equality on the agenda in our own workplaces. As I conclude, Emilia, I think it is important for us to understand as women leaders that the spread of coronavirus in the country could only be understood by us and be promoted. The rights of women can only be promoted by us in the front who understand how is it possible to imagine what basically the world will be put into, and we reset ourselves with most economic sectors to reestablish ourselves from a zero base and make sure that we can achieve better outcomes after the pandemic and do away with gender inequalities. So as women leaders with equal representation and decision-making power, I like what we've already been said, that gender equality and women's rights are essential to getting through this pandemic together so that we could be able to recover faster. Thank you very much.